One of my main goals for my studio has been to put together my ultimate guitar rig, one that would allow me to dial in pretty much any guitar sound I could ever want or need. I think I'm pretty much there. Let's take a look. I'm Steve. Thanks for tuning in and welcome to my studio. Now, if you've seen part one of my studio tour, then you know that from the word go, my studio is about recording guitar. Loud, beautiful, and sometimes brutal electric guitar. With this direction in mind, I've been busy putting together this killer guitar rig. There are some amazing amps in this setup because I want a variety of tones, I want variations on tones, and I want flexibility. And when I'm in the zone, musical ideas often pop up out of nowhere, but they also can pop out as quick as they pop up. So I want to be able to move from idea to idea, part to part, without needing to stop to mess with a bunch of technical stuff. With this rig, I think I've ticked all of these boxes. I'm sure you're familiar with most of these amps behind me. There's nothing new or exotic here, just raw tone machines. Oh, and for the people who are going to watch this and say, just get a Kemper or a Fractal or a Quad Cortex. I own two Kempers. I love them. I've used a Kemper on every live gig I've played since April of 2019 and plan on continuing to do so. But there's just something about the feel of a mic'd up tube amp and speaker cabinet that I haven't found in software yet. Most of the amps here are fairly common, so I'll just give you a brief run through. Starting at the top left, I have a Wong's 2204HW, which is basically a hand-wired clone of a 50-watt Marshall JCM 800. Beneath that, I have a 100-watt Marshall Vintage Modern, then a 100-watt JCM 2000, it's DSL 100, with Voodoo Amps Sentis Custom Mod, and a Splon 100-watt Quick Rod. Now moving over to the top right, we have a 1965 Fender Bassman, a 1970 Fender Bandmaster, MESA 3-channel dual rectifier, and a 100-watt 5153. And finally, all the way to the right, I have a fairly recent Fender 68 Custom Deluxe Reverb. I've modified this one just a little bit by putting in a Celestion G1265 from 1979. I just really like the way that speaker sounds in there. And below that, I have a 1974 Fender Twin Reverb. Okay, let's talk about speakers. Pretty much anyone will tell you speakers have an enormous impact on the sound of a guitar amp. Some would even say they make the biggest difference of any component. Ain't that right, Glenn Fricker? You know, I can't say I disagree. It's for that reason I've got 4 very different speaker types in these cabs back here to kind of broaden the palette of tones I can get. Starting on the left is my Splon 412. Well, I thought it was a Splon. When I bought it, the dude said it was a Splon, and it says Splon on it. Let me explain. I like to run my amps at 16 ohms. To my ears, they just sound better on their highest impedance tap. There is some science to back this up, but that's beyond the scope of this video. Well, when I bought this cab, it had 4 8-ohm Celestion EVH speakers, and I decided to swap them out for 16-ohm speakers. Somewhere along the line, I was talking with Scott Splon, who is a super nice guy and one hell of a tone guru as well. He's a tone genius. Anyhow, and I sent him a picture of the inside of the cabinet, and he told me, that's not mine. I didn't build that. So it turns out it's a counterfeit Splon cabinet. As luck would have it, the cabinet sounds amazing. So while I would rather it be one of Scott's cabs, I'm not too bothered because it's an amazing sounding cabinet. Moving along, this Marshall 412 is from 1979 and originally had Celestion G1265s in it. Now, since I've got another Marshall cabinet, which I'll show you in just a minute, with these same speakers in it, I took those out. One of them's in that deluxe reverb you just saw. and replaced them with WGS HM75s and Veteran 30s in an X pattern. This cabinet's got a warmer, slightly less harsh top end to it, and it's great for lead stuff. Next is my Bogner 412. This one features Celestion Vintage 30s. Now, somewhere along the line, someone decided to replace two of the original Vintage 30s with Vintage 30s spec'd for MESA Boogie. This is a great thing for me because the MESA spec Vintage 30s are very highly regarded, and in my little limited testing, they do sound better than the other two Vintage 30s in that cabinet, which are also made in the UK. This is probably my favorite cabinet for crunchy guitar tones. It just sounds amazing. And finally, here's another classic Marshall cabinet, this one from 1982. Notice the JCM 800 badge at the lower left. This cabinet has Celestion G12 65 speakers in it and just sounds out of this world. Up until a couple weeks ago, this cab was actually sitting in my control room with me. I don't know why I didn't bring it out here to the rig, but I'm sure glad I did because it sounds fantastic. All the speaker cabs are permanently mic'd up. I've done it this way because, like I said earlier, I like to be able to get going at a moment's notice, and I don't want to be fumbling around with mic positioning and cable routing and all that stuff. So, why so many mics? Well, in a word, options. I like to have options, and these mics all just sound great together. Now, the mics are as follows. Each cabinet has a Shure SM57, duh, of course, and also a Sennheiser MD421. Now, I prefer the sound of the older 421s, so all of these are the U5 revision, I believe, from the 1980s. When I'm recording guitar, my goal is to make it sound like it sounds when you're in the room with it. If you've ever taken a SM57, popped it on the speaker, and then listened through studio monitors, you know that ain't always the case. So in my search for a miking scheme, I tried a bunch of different things. Different microphones, different mic placement, learned a lot about phase relationships, etc. The 57 and 421 is a classic combination for miking guitar cabinets, and it sounds amazing. But sometimes it doesn't give me that amp in the room sound, and that's what I want. So I added an SE Electronics VR1 ribbon microphone to try to capture some of that girth that you hear from a speaker cabinet when you're in the room with it. It did that, but there was still something missing that I was trying to compensate for with channel EQ and failing miserably. So then a few months ago, I saw an ad for a mic called a Vintage 67 from JZ Microphones out of Latvia. They were running a special. It was basically buy one, get one free. So on a whim, I bought two of them. So I popped them up on two different cabinets, and boom, what I was missing, there it was. Needless to say, I didn't send them back. In fact, a few weeks ago, they ran another special, basically half off again, so I grabbed another one. These mics were seriously the missing piece, and I'm so glad I found out about them. So, the EVH greenbacks, the Vintage 30s, and the G12 65s all have a 57, a 421, the Vintage 67 from JZ, and an SE Electronics VR1 ribbon mic. Now, I don't have the ribbon or the condenser on the other Marshall cabinet, mostly because right now I'm focusing more on rhythm stuff, and that cabinet I'm going to use more for lead stuff, and because I can't afford another Vintage 67 or SE1 right now. So when I go to record in that cabinet, I'll just move a couple of mics over to it. As for the Fender amps, if I need to mic those, I'll just grab some mics off the 412s. I'm only set up for 16 channels right now, and including my DI track and this mic I'm speaking through right now, all the tracks are taken up. I've got a few pedals I like to use, but I don't want them always to be in my signal path. If I'm using it, yeah, but if I'm not using it, I don't want it in the path. So I've got them run into this little loop switcher here. It's called the Hex from Voodoo Labs. Basically, I just push the button corresponding to the pedal's position in the loop switcher when I want to use it. For instance, if I hit number 1, that turns on my compressor pedal. If I hit it again, it turns it off. Simple as that. Now, the pedals I have up here are an MXR Dynacomp, an Xotic Effects BB Boost, the Andy Timmons edition, a Boss/JHS Angry Driver. I keep that on the blues driver side usually and push the Fenders with it. A Boss GEQ7 EQ pedal, an Xotic Effects EP Booster, a GNI Analog Stereo Dual Chorus, killer sounding chorus pedal, and an ISP decimator to kill some of the noise that you get with pedals sometimes. All of the amp heads and speaker cabinets are running through my KHE amp cab switcher. This allows me to play through whichever amp I want, through whichever speaker cabinet I want, without having to mess around fumbling with a bunch of cables. If I had like 2 amps, that wouldn't be a big deal. But with 8 amp heads and 4 speaker cabinets, yeah, that could be a headache. The ACS makes it simple, and that's the thing with this rig. There's a lot of stuff hooked up, but the operation is dead simple. All the mic cables are Megami, and the connectors are Neutrik. All the instrument cables are either Megami or Redco, also with Neutrik connectors, and made to the shortest possible lengths to ensure the least amount of cable resistance between my guitar and amps. You'll see in a minute how this adds up. Okay, so far it seems simple enough, but I'm not going to lie. From here, it gets pretty convoluted. So maybe grab you something to drink, put on your nerd glasses. Let's head into the control room. When I'm recording, 99% of the time, I'm in here where I can listen through my monitors and not have to wear headphones while I'm tracking. I mean, cans are cool and all, but I just prefer to be able to hear and feel the music through my speakers and my subs. In this room, I'm roughly 45 feet away from my guitar amps. Now, a long guitar cable can really have a negative effect on guitar tone. So how am I doing this? Well, when I'm in here, the guitar is plugged into the transmitter half of an SGI system from Radial Engineering. The SGI, which stands for Studio Guitar Interface, converts the high impedance signal from the guitar into low impedance, where it can then run through the snake into my live room. Once there, the SGI receiver then converts the signal back to the high impedance guitar signal that the amps expect to see. It's fairly simple in concept, but apparently not so easy to pull off. The SGI works great though. I've done A/B tests, both using a looper and playing live, and I can't really hear or feel a difference. I want to give you a brief rundown on how things are wired. I've opted to go with Cat 6 cabling instead of audio snake cable. Each Cat 5 or Cat 6 cable, it's got to be shielded, is capable of carrying 4 channels of analog audio. So with just a few Ethernet cable runs, I'm set up for 16 channels plus 4 return channels. These are connected via a junction box here on the wall. From the junction box, the cables run up the wall, through 2 attic spaces over into the live room, and down the wall to a matching junction box. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to make a video explaining this in more detail. From the snake box, the signal travels first to the SGI receiver where it's converted back to high impedance, and then to a Little Labs Red Eye 3D reamp box, which is also an extremely clean DI device. Here, the signal is split. The raw, unamped guitar signal runs through the snake back into the control room and into my Audient EVO-SP8 mic preamp and recorded raw. I do this so I have the option of reamping later. Meanwhile, the main guitar signal then leaves the red eye and runs into the loop switcher where it combines with whatever pedals I choose. After leaving the loop switcher, our well-traveled little guitar signal then runs to a radial big shot ABY switch, where it can be sent either to the KHE amp cab switcher or over to the Fender combo amps. Since these amps have their own speakers built in, I don't have these running through the amp cab switcher, hence the need for the AB switch. The radial features the ability to isolate the ground of one output, eliminating the ground loop that sometimes happens when physically connecting 2 amps. When the signal gets over to the Fenders, it runs into a Lili P-split, which is a transformer isolated splitter box which feeds the signal to both amps. So, I've got this killer amp cabs pedals set up, and it's all wired so I can play and record from the luxury of my control room. What am I going to do to make this even better? You're going to love this. After I had all this wired up and running and was dialing stuff in, I learned fairly quickly that playing for a little bit, putting the guitar down, going into the other room to switch to a different amp or speaker cab or pedal was getting to be a drag. There's got to be a better way to do this, right? Have I mentioned that I'm a nerd? Of course there's a better way. What if I could switch everything from right here in my control room? Want a different amp? Hit a button. Want a different speaker cabinet? There's a button for that. Rinse, repeat, you get the idea. Well, as it turns out, both the KHE amp cab switcher and the Voodoo Labs loop switcher are controllable via MIDI. Now, unfortunately, much like with instrument cable, MIDI cables have a limit on distance, how long the cable can be. So what's the answer? Well, apparently MIDI over Bluetooth is more of a thing than I realized. And using this little device called a WIDI jack, I could transmit MIDI from my Mac here in the control room out to my guitar rig in the live room. Using my Stream Deck XL, I've programmed buttons for selected amps, speaker cabinets, and effects pedals. Also cool is that this is almost infinitely expandable. If I get more amp cab switcher units, they can all be controlled like this. Rack effects, same thing. In theory, this sounds really cool. In reality, it's even cooler. Check it out. All right, we're here in my control room now. I've got my guitar connected as I described just a couple minutes ago. From my interface, it's going directly into OBS Studio, which is the software I use to cut all of these different angles together. Now, over here, you'll see my Stream Deck. That's what I'm using to control everything. The top row are the speaker cabinets. The second row are the amp heads. And the third row are the effects pedals. Over here to your right is my KHE amp cab switcher. And on top of the rack, you'll see my Voodoo Labs hex switcher. That's what controls the pedals. The KHE is for the amps and the cabs. Now, I'm not going to take the time and showcase all the different amps here, just because that's beyond the scope of this video. So I'm just going to play a little bit, switch between amps and cabs so you can see how everything works. I'm going to start with the Badlander cabinet with vintage 30s. I'm going to go to the Wong's 2204HW, which is basically a 50-watt JCM 800 hand-wired clone. I'm going to turn on the BB Boost EQ, the EP Boost, and the chorus. And if we're going to do 800, might as well be Zach. So there it is, my ultimate guitar nerd studio guitar rig. I hope you've enjoyed this little walkthrough as much as I have. This has been a labor of love and a dream for a long, long time, and I'm happy to finally be able to share it with you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. I'm always looking for ideas for new videos, so if you have anything you'd like me to talk about, shoot me a message or let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button. It really does help to let YouTube know to share my videos. Thanks.